Chapter 1. My name is John Trenchard, and I was 15 when this story began. My parents had been dead for years, and I lived with my aunt, Miss Arnold, a kind but strict woman. It was late in October of 1757, and I was sitting in the living room reading a book called The Arabian Nights Entertainment. When it became too dark to read, I got up and went out into the street. It was a poor street because Moonfleet was a poor village, with not even 200 people. The sun had set, and it was beginning to get dark. I walked along to Ratsy's house because I could hear him working there. Ratsy was the sexton and the mason of the village. "Hello, John," said Ratsy. "Come in and help me finish this job. You can hold the lantern for me." Ratsy was always kind to me, so I went in and held the lantern while he worked on the tombstone of David Block, which said, "Sacred to the memory of David Block, age 15, who was killed by a shot fired from the schooner Elector." On the 21st of June, 1757, the whole village was talking about David's death. He was the only child of Elzevir Block, who had the Why Not Inn in the village. David was on a small smuggler's boat that June night, when it was stopped by the king's schooner. People said that a local magistrate called Maskew warned the king's soldiers about the smugglers. There was some fighting that night, and Maskew shot young David in the face and killed him. Poor David paid a high price for a night's adventure. The other smugglers were caught and sent to prison. "What a cruel thing to do, shooting such a young boy," said Ratsy as he worked on David's tombstone. "Well, I'm almost finished for today. You've helped me with the lantern, John, so come to the Why Not Inn with me. Elzevir needs to talk to friends at a time like this, and we can have something to drink that will warm us on this cold evening." I was only a boy, and it was an honor to be invited to the Why Not, the inn where all the men went. Aunt Jane will get angry if she finds out, I thought. The Why Not was not the real name of the inn. Its name was the Mohune Arms. The Mohunes once owned the whole village, but they had a lot of bad luck and lost all of their money. Their emblem, the form of a Y, was still on many of the buildings in the village. I was very excited when Ratsy opened the door of the inn. Elzevir Block was sitting by the fireplace smoking his pipe. He was a strong man with a lot of gray hair and a rather kind face. Elzevir got up when we came in and said sharply, "What does this boy want?" "Good evening, Elzevir," said Ratsy. "John and I want something to drink. It's cold outside. I've just finished working on David's tombstone, and it will be ready by Monday night." "David will finally rest in peace," said Elzevir sadly. "But the men who killed him won't find peace anywhere." "What happened to David was terrible," said Ratsy, "but revenge is always wrong." Elzevir did not answer and looked at the fire in the fireplace. We drank some hot tea and looked at the fire, too. At last Elzevir spoke. "John, it's time for you to go home. Men say that Blackbeard walks around the streets on the first cold nights." He evidently wanted to get rid of me, so I said good night and left. I ran all the way home, and I didn't go by the churchyard because Blackbeard's ghost was there at night. Blackbeard was one of the Mohunes who died a century ago and was buried in the crypt under the church with other members of his family. Some people said he could not rest because he was looking for his lost treasure. Others said he could not rest because he had been evil in his life. Their description of Blackbeard was frightening. They said he was very tall and strong, with a long black beard, a dark face, and evil eyes. The Reverend Mr. Glennie, who was the parson and our school teacher, knew a lot about these things. He said that Blackbeard's real name was Colonel John Mohune. During the Civil War, King Charles II was a prisoner and gave him a huge diamond in exchange for a favor, to help him escape. Mohun took the diamond but did not help the king escape. He hid the diamond somewhere, and after the war he returned to Moonfleet, where everyone hated him. Mohun died, and the secret of the diamond died with him. So now his ghost was trying to find the precious diamond. However, Mr. Glennie did not believe that Blackbeard had hidden the diamond in the churchyard. He believed it was hidden somewhere else. I was a brave boy, but I never walked near the churchyard at night. Chapter 2. Noisy Coffins. On the night of the 3rd of November, there was a terrible storm with very strong winds. I don't think anyone in Moonfleet could sleep that night. Early the next morning, the churchyard was flooded and water started entering the Why Not Inn. But by 9 o'clock, the wind stopped blowing and the sun came out. Before noon, the people of the village came out of their houses to talk about the terrible storm. This storm was important to me because it changed my life. Now I will tell you how. Very few people came to church on Sunday morning after the flood. Mr. Glennie, Ratsey, a few of us boys, some old women, and strangely enough, Elzevir Block, who never went to church. It was cold and damp inside the church, so Ratsey lit a fire. Then something unusual happened. Just as Mr. Glennie started his sermon, we heard a strange noise under the church. It was not a loud noise. It sounded like two boats touching each other at sea. We boys looked at each other because we knew what was under the church. The tombs of the Mohuns. They had been there a long time and they had never made any noise. Everyone in the church was frightened. Then we heard another, louder noise. It sounded like the cry of a man. At that point, everyone ran out of the church, except for Mr. Glennie, Ratsey, Elzevir Block, and me. Mr. Glennie went on with his sermon and did not say anything about the strange noises. At the end of the sermon, Ratsey asked, "Mr. Glennie, are dead men moving under our feet?" "No, no," said the parson. "The flood has filled the crypt with water, and so the coffins are moving around and making a noise." I believed the minister's words, but I was frightened. We left the church and walked towards the village together. Mr. Glennie was always friendly and kind to me, so I asked him a question. "Mr. Glennie, what do you know about Blackbeard and his treasure?" "My dear boy," he answered, "I don't know much. I only know that Colonel John Mohun, called Blackbeard, spent all of his family's money and the poor houses of Moonfleet had to close. He was an evil man and even killed one of his loyal servants. At the end of his life, he was probably afraid, and he talked to the Reverend Kindersley of Dorchester. He left a will which I have seen." "You've seen Blackbeard's will?" I asked excitedly. "Yes," said Mr. Glennie. "He said that his treasure, which was the diamond, should be sold and the money used to repair the poor houses. But he never said where the diamond was hidden. He probably wanted to get it himself, sell it, and then give the money to the poor houses. But he died before he could get it. So people say he can't rest in his tomb until the treasure is found, and the poor are helped." I thought a lot about what Mr. Glennie said. Perhaps I could find the diamond one day and become a rich man. I also thought a lot about the noises under the church. I decided that coffins did not make those noises because they get old and the wood breaks after a few years. But what made those strange noises? So on Monday after school, I ran down the street and across the fields to the churchyard. I wanted to listen to the Mohun coffins. I could not get into the church because Ratsey had the key, but I stood outside and listened carefully. Everything was silent. Those strange noises had stopped. I walked to the back of the church because it was sunny there, and I saw two men. Ratsey and Elzevir Block. Ratsey was lying on the ground with his ear to the wall, and Elzevir was looking at the sea with a small telescope in his hand. I was surprised and didn't know what to do. At first I felt like running away, but then I decided to stay. "Good morning, Mr. Ratsey," I said. He jumped to his feet nervously and his face became bright red. "Good morning, John," he said. "What are you doing in the churchyard?" "I came to listen to the Mohun coffins," I answered. "Well, I came here to examine the church wall after the flood. I think I'll have to repair the wall a bit." I did not believe what he said, because the church wall was in good condition. As Ratsey was talking to me, I noticed that Elzevir was amused at Ratsey's embarrassment. When we went to church on Sunday, everything was quiet as usual, and there were no strange noises in the crypt. After my meeting with Ratsey and Elzevir at the churchyard, I stayed away from it for a few weeks. One afternoon at the beginning of February 1758, I was sitting in the churchyard on a flat stone tomb looking at the sea. The floods and bad weather of November had made deep cracks in the earth. I looked at one of the cracks and noticed that it got bigger on the other side of the tomb. I got on my knees and looked down into the big crack, which was like a small hole. I was very surprised and excited when I saw that there was something under the tomb. For a boy of my age, this was a great discovery. I put my feet into the small hole and jumped down. I had discovered a secret passage under the church. My heart beat fast as I slowly walked along the dark passage. Could this be where Blackbeard had hidden his diamond? Suddenly it was so dark that I couldn't see and I was afraid. I climbed out quickly and decided to return later with a candle. I ran home and got there late for tea. My aunt was angry, but she only said, "You mustn't come home so late, John. A young boy should never be out after 7:30. It's not safe." After tea, Aunt Jane started reading a book to me, but it was too serious, so I thought about Blackbeard's treasure. When she finished reading, it was time for bed, and we both went up to our rooms. "I'll wait for her to fall asleep and then I'll get a big candle from the kitchen and go back to the churchyard," I thought excitedly. Chapter 3. The Crypt. It was 10:30 when I left the house. Everyone in Moonfleet was sleeping, except the men at the Why Not Inn. As I approached the old churchyard, I began thinking about Blackbeard's ghost, and I felt afraid, but I didn't stop. When I got to the hole on the side of the tomb, I thought, maybe Blackbeard is waiting at the bottom of the hole. I looked at the bright moon in the night sky, and then I looked at the sea. I saw a small sailing boat in the bay. It was probably a smuggler's boat. I looked at the dark hole again and decided to jump into it, and so my adventure began. I lit my candle, which burnt brightly, and walked through the passage. The diamond is probably here somewhere, I thought. Till be able to buy presents for Mr. Glennie and Ratsey and Aunt Jane. I'll become the richest man in Moonfleet. As I continued walking, I saw footprints on the damp ground. Someone had already been there. Then I suddenly reached a big room. It was the Mohun crypt. All around the walls of the crypt there were stone shelves with coffins on them. What frightening place! In the middle of the crypt there were casks of all sizes, with white letters and numbers on them. I was right. The noise we heard in church was not the noise of coffins, but the noise of these casks. I was amazed. This was a secret hiding place for the smugglers' casks of wine. Now I realized that the flat tomb where I always sat was the smuggler's entrance to the crypt. I remembered how Ratsey had always tried to frighten me with his stories about Blackbeard. He wanted to keep me away from the churchyard. Now I understood why Ratsy and Elzevir were in the churchyard that afternoon. They knew about the secret hiding place, and they probably knew about the smugglers. Perhaps they were smugglers. But how could I find the diamond? I looked at the coffins for a few minutes, and then the clock in the church tower struck midnight. What a ghostly time, and what a ghostly place. Suddenly I began hearing voices in the distance, and I was terrified. The voices got louder, and I heard a man jump from the churchyard into the crypt. He started talking to other men who were still in the churchyard. I wanted to hide, but I didn't know where. When I saw a coffin on the top shelf of the crypt, I put out my candle, climbed up, and hid between the coffin and the wall. I could not see anything from my hiding place, but I heard Ratsy's voice talking to other men. "I was in Dorchester 3 days ago," said one man, "and people say that Judge Barentine wants to hang all smugglers." "Barentine and old Maskew are a cruel pair," said another man. "If I meet Maskew alone one night, I'll—" "Don't touch Maskew, he's mine," said a deep voice. It was Elzevir. Then a man said, "I don't trust that Trenchard boy. He always sits on the flat tomb and looks at the sea. I even saw him tonight with my telescope. I think he's Maskew's spy. He tells Maskew everything he sees." "You're right," said another man. "I've seen him near the Maskew house many times." The man was right. I liked Grace Maskew, and when she was very ill, I sat near her house hoping to see Dr. Hawkins. One day I saw him and asked him about Grace. He was a kind man and said she was getting better. This made me happy. "No, the Trenchard boy isn't a spy," said Ratsy. "He sits on the flat tomb of the churchyard because he likes looking at the sea. He's a good, simple boy. He believes everything I tell him. I've told him some terrible stories about Blackbeard, and he'll never come to the churchyard at night." He started laughing, and the others laughed too. Then Elzevir spoke. "John's a brave boy. He's David's age, and he'll be a good sailor one day." I was pleased to hear Elzevir say those words because I liked him. "Well, Ratsy," said Elzevir, "you have to close that hole under the flat tomb because someone could look down into the crypt." "Don't worry, I'll do it," said Ratsy. Soon the meeting ended and the men left the crypt. I wanted to leave too, so I lit my candle and looked around. I tried climbing down from the stone shelf, but I slipped and grabbed the old coffin. My hand went through the rotten wood and touched something strange. I looked at my hand and saw a man's black beard. I dropped my candle and cried, "The beard of a dead man, Blackbeard's beard." I was terrified and wanted to run away, but I didn't. Perhaps this was a clue. Perhaps Blackbeard's treasure was nearby. I looked at the beard carefully and then decided to look inside the rotten coffin. I must be brave, I thought, if I want to find the diamond. I slowly opened the old coffin, and inside I saw the skeleton and old clothes of Colonel John Mohune. I put my trembling hand inside and looked for the diamond, but it was not there. However, I found a locket around Mohune's neck. I slowly took the locket out of the coffin and opened it, hoping to find the diamond inside. But the diamond was not inside. I only found a folded piece of yellow paper with some words from the Bible. Those were probably words to keep bad spirits away, so I put the locket around my neck. Perhaps the words would keep Blackbeard's ghost away from me. I went to the end of the passage and wanted to climb out of the crypt into the churchyard, but the hole was closed. Ratsy had closed it that night after leaving the crypt. My candle went out, and I was now a prisoner in the dark crypt. I was too tired to be scared, and I sat down on the damp ground and fell asleep. Chapter 4. The auction. I don't know how long I slept because it was always dark in the crypt. A bit of light came through the tiny crack in the tomb above my head. I was hungry and thirsty, and I did not know what to do. Soon the small bit of light disappeared and I knew a day had passed. And then another day passed and I felt terrible. I was hungrier and thirstier than the day before. I started calling and shouting, hoping that someone might hear me. But no one heard me, and finally I fainted. When I woke up, I was in a clean, comfortable bed in a sunny little room. Am I in my aunt's house? I thought. Was the adventure in the crypt a bad dream? I felt something around my neck. It was Colonel John Mohun's locket. Then the door opened and Elzevir Block came in. "Oh, Elzevir, help me, I'm not a spy." He looked at me kindly and said, "No one will hurt you, John. You're at the Why Not Inn. I know you're not a spy. Just rest and eat this." I slowly ate some hot soup, and for 10 days he looked after me until I was well again. During that time he told me what had happened. "Mr. Glennie was the first one to look for you because you weren't at school. He went to see your aunt who said you had run away. That evening Sam Tewksbury came to the Why Not Inn and was very frightened because he had heard someone calling and shouting at the churchyard. I immediately understood that someone was shut inside the crypt and I went there quickly. I found you and brought you back to the inn. You reminded me of David." Elzevir was a very kind man, and as the days passed, he loved me like a son. One day, Ratsey came to see me and said, "Only Elzevir and I know that you were in our crypt. So remember, keep the secret and Elzevir and I will do the same." "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone about the crypt. It's our secret," I said. When I was feeling better, I went to see my aunt, who was not happy to see me. She did not let me come in the house and said, "People who go to the Why Not Inn are not welcome in my house." I turned my back on the only home I had and walked back to the Why Not Inn with tears in my eyes. I told Elzevir about my aunt, and he replied smiling, "Your new home is here with me, John. You've taken David's place. I'm happy you're here." I've mentioned Maskew's name a few times, and I'd like to say something about him. He was not a tall man, and he had a thin face, sharp gray eyes, and reddish hair. He was a lawyer and had made money in Scotland many years ago. People said he came to Moonfleet to get away from trouble. He bought a big mansion on the Mohun property. It was an old mansion with some broken parts, but he did not like spending money. So he only repaired the part where he and his daughter Grace lived. Before Maskew bought the mansion, no one lived on the Mohun property, and children played in the big garden and men hunted in the woods. But after his arrival, he did not allow anyone on his land. Everyone in Moonfleet disliked him for this, and when he became a magistrate, everyone disliked him even more. After the death of young David Block, Maskew's life was in danger. However, everyone liked Maskew's daughter, Grace. She was a tall, thin girl with light brown hair and a friendly face. She came to school with me and the children of the village, and we sometimes met after school. One morning in March, the bailiff and his clerk came to Moonfleet to renew the 5-year rent of the Why Not Inn. This required a formal auction, even if for generations only Elzevir's family had rented the inn. Elzevir and I sat at a big table near the fireplace, and the clerk put a long candle on the big table. He lit the candle and said, "Today we are here to receive offers to rent the Why Not Inn for the next 5 years. When this candle dies, the auction is over and no one can make another offer. Do you all understand?" Elzevir and I said, "Yes." "Very well, we can start," said the clerk. "What do you offer, sir?" said the bailiff, looking at Elzevir. I offer a rent of $12 a year for 5 years, said Elzevir in a loud voice. Please write it down, said the bailiff to the clerk. Does anyone else want to make an offer? I was silent and looked around amused, because only Elzevir and I were in the inn. We must wait for the candle to go out, said the clerk. Then the auction is over. So we sat there and waited for the candle to go out. Suddenly, the door of the Why Not Inn opened and Maskew appeared. Elzevir's face became dark and angry. You're not welcome here, Maskew, cried Elzevir. Gentlemen, please, said the bailiff. This is an auction and people can come and make offers. The candle is still burning. Chapter 5. The 16th of April. When the people of Moonfleet found out about the auction, they were angry with Maskew. For days he didn't come into the village. The people knew that Maskew wanted to help the king's soldiers arrest the smugglers, but no one understood why. Some said he was evil and liked hurting people. Others said he wanted to get rid of the smugglers so that he could control the smuggling business. In the past, I had seen him standing at the window of his mansion with a telescope in his hand, looking at the sea. He was probably looking for the smugglers' boats. One evening in the Why Not Inn, Elzevir said to me, Sit down, John. I want to talk to you. That devil Maskew is trying to catch us smugglers, so we must be very careful with the next cargo. The sailing ship Bonaventure will be here soon with about 100 casks of wine. But the ship won't stop at Moonfleet Bay. It will go to Horehead because Maskew is probably watching the bay and the churchyard. And we won't hide the casks in the crypt. At Horehead, we'll meet other smugglers with horses and take the casks to Pyegrove's Hole and hide them there. I suddenly felt some cold air on my shoulders and I quickly turned around. What's the matter? Asked Elzevir. I think someone was listening to us and has just left, I said. I felt some cold air on my shoulders. No, said Elzevir. You felt cold air because it's a windy night. Don't worry, John, no one was here. Elzevir, I asked nervously, are we leaving the Why Not Inn tomorrow? Yes, John, we're leaving the inn and we're probably going to live in a small house near Worth. It's near the Lobster Inn and there's a good view of the sea. But you're tired, poor boy. Go to bed now and get a little sleep. Elzevir was right. I was tired, but I could not sleep. I did not want to leave Moonfleet because I had lived there all of my life. And I did not want to leave Grace Maskew. She was a dear friend, and I loved her. I decided to go and meet Grace the next morning in our secret place in the woods. The next day was the 16th of April, and it was a day I will never forget. It was a beautiful, cool spring day, and at 10 o'clock in the morning I was in the woods, where I met Grace. We were happy to see each other, but Grace became sad when I told her I was leaving Moonfleet. She told me her father had been away the night before. We talked about different things and then we said goodbye. As I was running back to the Why Not Inn, I saw Aunt Jane standing at the door of her house. She stopped me and said, John, take this little red Bible. It belonged to your poor mother. Perhaps it will help you find the right way in your life. Thank you, Aunt Jane, I said politely, putting the little red Bible in my pocket. I continued running down the village to the inn. That evening, Elzevir and I left the Why Not Inn and started walking towards Horehead, which was 15 miles away. Horehead was the highest cliff in the area. It was after midnight when we got there. We saw other smugglers waiting silently, and some of them had horses. We went down to the beach and met the men from the Bonaventure. Most of them were French or Dutch. The precious casks were quickly brought to shore, and by 3 o'clock in the morning we began leaving the beach. We climbed up the cliff with the heavy casks, and I noticed something or someone moving behind a bush. Some of the other men noticed too. It was Maskew. 2 of the younger men ran after him as he tried to escape and caught him after a few minutes. They brought him forward. He was pale. They tied his hands and feet and threw him to the ground. He was the most hated man in Moonfleet. "Shoot him!" cried one of the smugglers. "No, hang him!" cried some others. "Let's throw him over the cliff and into the sea!" shouted a young smuggler, laughing. "Look, he's got a gun under his coat," said an old smuggler, taking the gun and throwing it at Elsevier's feet. Elsevier looked at the gun and then at Maskew. "This man killed my son. He's mine. Don't touch him. Leave him here with me. Take the casks away and hide them. It's almost morning." The men complained, but they listened to Elsevier. After a while, they slowly climbed up the cliff with their horses and casks. Elsevier, Maskew, and I were alone now, and I was afraid. I knew how much Elsevier hated Maskew. "Let me go, criminal!" shouted Maskew. "I'm an important magistrate, and you're just a smuggler. If you don't let me go, I'll hang you." Elsevier did not shout. He spoke calmly and coldly. "You killed my son, David, and you took the inn away from me. You devil! Now I'm going to kill you with your gun. Don't kill me. Think of my poor daughter, Grace. She has only got me in the world. Her mother is dead. And I had only one son, David, and you killed him." I felt terrible, and as I looked at Maskew's pale face and frightened eyes, I could see a bit of grace in him. I felt sorry for him and thought about the girl I loved. "I can give you 10,000 pounds if you let me go," said Maskew, his voice shaking. "I'll give you the Why Not Inn, and I'll leave Moonfleet." Maskew started crying like a baby. It was a sad scene. I looked at Elsevier in the eyes and said, "Please don't kill him. Think of his daughter, Grace. She'll be all alone. Let him go, Elsevier." Elsevier raised the gun and pointed it at Maskew's head. At that moment, I pulled Elsevier's arm and the gun went off, but Maskew was not hit. Suddenly, we heard voices on the cliff above us, and we looked up. There were about 20 of the king's soldiers standing on top of the cliff with their guns pointed at us. "Stop where you are," cried one soldier. "You're prisoners of the king." "Someone told them about the ship," cried Elsevier angrily. "And I know who it was. It was you, Maskew. You were listening to our conversation the other night at the inn. John was right. You're a dead man." Elsevier pointed the gun at Maskew's head, but at that moment some shots came from the cliff. Maskew fell over. He was dead. A shot from one of the soldiers had hit him in the head and killed him immediately. "Run to the side of the cliff and hide," cried Elsevier. I started running, but I fell and I felt a terrible pain in my leg. "I can't walk anymore," I said to Elsevier. He turned around, picked me up like a baby, and carried me away along the side of the cliff, while the soldiers continued shooting. Chapter 6. Blackbeard's riddle, Elsevier and I stopped when we were